Well, turning now to Puerto Rico, where 5 more aftershocks struck the island late last night as officials continue to scramble for solutions. Former President Barack Obama tweeted his support yesterday, saying, quote, "Our fellow Americans in Puerto Rico can use our support after this week's earthquakes, and it's up to us to pull together for one another once again." Earthquakes have been hitting the island since December of last year. So Arelis Hernandez is in San Juan. She is a reporter for the Washington Post. Thank you so much for joining us. Arelis, let me tell you, these earthquakes are happening so frequently, I'm almost getting confused with the headlines. I see one headline and I think, oh, is that about an earthquake that happened yesterday? Oh, no, that's an earthquake that happened last night. I mean, that's how frequent they are. Just give us a sense of just how often the island has been hit with these earthquakes and the toll that it's having on residents.
Yeah, no, so we had the one big earthquake on Tuesday, which is a 6.4, and since then it hasn't stopped. And we're talking about every couple of hours, sometimes within 10 minutes, you'll feel 2 or 3 of varying degrees of intensity and potency. But, you know, for people who live in the southern region and are sleeping outside because they don't trust that their homes won't collapse on them, it's this like constant level of stress and fear and anxiety that any moment that you think you can relax, then the earth starts to rumble again.
You know, we had obviously there was a lot of coverage of Puerto Rico post hurricane, and we knew that it was going to be sort of a long road to recovery. And then we kind of stopped covering what was happening on the island. When the earthquake started to hit, how far along in terms of recovery was Puerto Rico?
Well, people had power and were returning to their normal lives for the most part. There are still, I think, thousands of people who still have, you know, those tarps, those blue tarps over their roofs. And so there are a bunch of places that still haven't fully recovered. But for the most part, things had returned to some level of normalcy, or at least a new level of normalcy for Puerto Rico. Keep in mind that when these earthquakes started back on the 28th, the government sort of fully admitted that they didn't have an emergency plan in place and were working on it as, you know, Tuesday's earthquake came through and rattled everyone and knocked out power across the island. You know, Puerto Ricans right now don't trust their government. They don't trust the federal government to be there for them. And what you saw particularly this weekend were hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans from across the island descended on the southern region with diapers, with tents, with all kinds of things that people have been asking for in order to camp out for what they think might be the long run.
And when you talk about them not trusting the federal government, you know, the president certainly has been quite silent when it comes to expressing his condolences, his interest in what's happening in Puerto Rico. But as I understand it, federal money has been released. Puerto Rico's governor is asking that a major declaration, asking for a major declaration request that would allow additional aid to be approved. What kind of aid do Puerto Ricans need? And, you know, is the feeling that President Trump is likely to give them what they need?
If you ask everyday people here, they have no trust that President Trump will deliver on the major disaster declaration. So what is happening is that FEMA is here under the emergency declaration. You know, having learned the lessons of the past, there were supplies and commodities sort of pre-staged, and they were able to get some of that stuff out, particularly like cots for some of these government-run tent cities. But when it comes for the government of Puerto Rico has been conducting these assessments of different buildings and now put the damages at $110 million. That's a preliminary estimate, and are asking the president to sort of release additional funds that will help, particularly, number one, the big issue, housing for these people who lost their homes and these people who don't trust their homes and are looking at the cracks and wondering whether, you know, another aftershock will completely take it down.
So listen, Arelis, what can we do? How can we help the people on the island?
So I think what most people are suggesting down here is to find some of these local groups that are directly impacting communities and families. Hispanics in Philanthropy Online is one of these groups, PR by PR. Some of these organizations that codified after Hurricane Maria, Hispanic Federation and others that are delivering aid directly to these people who are affected. And I think a bunch of Puerto Rican journalists and Puerto Ricans who are watching in the diaspora have been tweeting these links out.
All right, Arelis Hernandez, thank you so much.
Thank you.